questions. How can we help? How can we support? How can you create volunteer options? How can you network? And so please use those opportunities. Well, we're starting to build this foundational build. We started with the theological piece and the biblical theology. We went into the legal impact. Now we're going to move into our next segment. And in this next segment, we want to go into some topics that are dear to these gentlemen's hearts. And we're going to, the idea is to get into the self and realization. And in this piece, we're going to start getting into more of the personal issues. And so in this assessment portion, we're going to start getting into some of the deeper issues that may be affecting them as well as the people they work with. And then we're going to build further into a relational panel, and then the so what? What do we do next? And that will be our end with our networking. So I'd like to introduce the two gentlemen that will be speaking this morning or this afternoon. Steve Hallamura, who is also on the Advisory Council for New Wine, New Wineskins, is going to be speaking to the interpersonal assessment of disabilities. Steve is the president of Hallamura Consulting Incorporation that he founded in 1986. Steve brings 30 years of experience to the consulting, coaching, training, and speaking profession. He is widely sought after in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion and leadership development and innovation. Hallamura Consulting serves businesses, nonprofit organizations, government agencies, and academic institutions of all sizes throughout the country. Steve is the author of 2 books, In Search of Sight and I Can See Clearly, as well as many journal articles. Steve received his master's from the University of Oregon and his bachelor's degree from Linfield College. Steve serves on the Advisory Council here at New Wine, and though Steve is blind, he loves running and was a torchbearer for the 1996 Olympics and also runs the Hood to Coast. That's exhausting to even think about. So let's welcome Steve and his sharing this afternoon.
Good afternoon. How is everybody today? All right, it's very good. That sounds kind of weak. How is everybody today? Oh, very good. Now, what I want you to do is turn to your neighbor and tell them you will tolerate them for the rest of the afternoon. Let's get that out of the way. I will tolerate you for the rest of the afternoon. All right, very good. Now, this is a academic institution. I need a bright scholar to tell me, what does the word to tolerate mean? Just shout it out. To put up with. What you told your neighbor is, I'll put up with you, but I really wish you would go away. And what's fascinating about that statement is sometimes I believe that people with disabilities were wished that they could go away so that others wouldn't have to deal with us. But it ain't going to happen, because we're here and we're here to stay, right? Is that right? And so now the other thing you can tell you, he's going to tolerate. Okay, Potter's giving me some flack already, Paul. What am I going to do? So the other thing I want you to tell your partner is you're a failure and so am I. So let's get all these things out of the way. You're a failure and so am I. If we are honest about that, isn't it true that most of us think less of ourselves than we do more of ourselves? Now, there are obviously some in the audience that are arrogant and they're really on it. We won't name any names, right? But the truth is, most of us feel like we're not as good as, or a failure. And when you're a person with a disability, in fact, I need to tell you about Rosa Parks. You know Rosa Parks as a black woman in 1955, and she came from the back of the bus and came to the front of the bus and said, I am now sitting in the front of the bus, which was a great thing. But the thing I want to say to you and to the rest of us, we as people with disability weren't even on the bus. So now at least we are on the diversity bus, though still in the back. And what I mean by that, if you look at the Civil Rights Acts, the first Civil Rights Act was in 1866. And then we moved to the 1920s where women were finally given permission to vote. And then Christy and Ian talked to us about the ADA in 1991 and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. But the very next Civil Rights Act was in 1964 when all this affirmative action and compliance and you will do this and you will do that came into being. It was to handle race, gender, religion, and educational differences. And where were the people with disabilities? Not there. So in that, what I want to say to us is that it takes some time to understand who am I in that process. You have a handout on your piece of paper, so I want to walk us through, because I think that in the dimensions of diversity, it doesn't matter whether it's blindness, Down syndrome, intellectual disabilities, race, gender, we go through 8 stages of development around whatever topic we are talking about. Today, we are talking about disability, but even within the different disabilities, like I now see myself as number 8, self-actualization, but I am at discovery and learning about autism and developmental disabilities. I'm over at discovery. But there's some stuff in between, like anger and rage, for example. The lead story in my second book, I Can See Clearly, the first thing in chapter 1 is my throwing a box of Kleenex across the room in my pastor's office. I found out later I nearly missed his left ear, and then I fell to the ground in tears. And he came around me and held me, and I just broke down. This was after I had already gotten my master's degree from the University of Oregon. I was a counselor at Lane Community College for 6 years, but I had had it with church. And I had it with church is because everybody, the men would be in one corner. It's a little more integrated today, but men would play golf, play baseball, volleyball, so I'm there not being able to participate in that. The women were talking about whatever they were talking about, and there was Steve just standing there, and it just didn't feel right. How could I be less involved? Marv and I got into an argument about that. Actually, by the way, there's an arguing is forbidden at our house. Did you know that I'm in a marriage where we never argue? And that would be a landmark to strive for. We never argue. We have intense fellowship, but we never argue. So anyway, Marvin and I got into that, and I said, Marv, there's just no place for me here. Well, he heard me. We got into an argument about 2 worlds versus 1 world, and I said to him, there's 2 worlds. And he said, no, it's 1 world. God has 1 world. I said, no, it's 2 worlds. If you don't believe me, go to eat by yourself in a public restaurant, and then go to the bathroom, come back and talk to me. And his whole world changed. It truly is 1 world. I know that now. But what he learned, for example, going to the bathroom, I'd like to write an article. Which way to the bathroom, : Once you're there, where is everything? And if you're a blind person, you have no clue what you're looking for in a bathroom. I might be looking for a paper towel dispenser, but it's a hand dryer thing. Did you know that at the PDX airport, there's a Braille sign on the top of the mirror that says, no smoking? Who in their right mind is going to go feeling around to look for? Do you see what I'm saying here? So the first stage of diversity or disability is discovery. You got to figure out where you are in relationship to the rest of the world. Oh, I'm blind. And by the way, I am 75 years old, turned 75 3 weeks ago, but I didn't become blind until I was 40, even though I was born without sight as a baby. Do you understand what I just said to you? I was born without being able to see as a baby, but I didn't become blind till I was 40 because I couldn't say it. I couldn't totally lean into it until I came to work for the Oregon Commission for the Blind after being at Lane Community College for 10 years. And all of that had to do with, and they told me, you're going to be in the paper because you are the face of blindness because you've been out in the real world, and that meant I had to get with being blind and go ahead and use my cane and travel and all of a sudden I'm the face of blindness. Well, sometimes after discovery, there is anger. I hope you're looking at your handout because that's what we're working from now. And so now the anger and rage was one of the results of my throwing the box of Kleenex across the room. But way down deep inside, there was a lot of doubt. Will I really make it? I grew up at a time when we were institutionalized. I left home at the age of 4.5, saw my parents twice a year, Christmas and summer, and you better believe there was a lot of anguish and hurt and heartbreak being away from family. And I'm so glad because I have a 7-year-old Down syndrome grandson now, and he gets to be home with his parents. You better believe I take that very, very seriously and give thanks to the Lord that no longer are there institutionalizations. I don't want to badmouth totally the institutionalization because that's where I learned how to read and write Braille. That's where I learned how to become an athlete and runner. And Trudy's right. I will be running Hood to Coast. Actually, it's going to be my last time. Done it this will be 29 years, 25 years with this team. And my body is finally saying, I think, son, you better go to a 1-day relay, not 2-day relay. And that's also okay. Now, for Bethesda Lutheran, I have a comment for you about what you said about inclusion. I think inclusion is both a noun and a verb. And Hood to Coast is one of those times when I belong. The definition of inclusion we use is the need to belong, to be a part of, and to not be discounted. And I belong there. I'm old, I'm Asian, I'm blind, I'm cranky, I'm funny, I'm grumpy, I'm hungry, and I'm sleepy. You're all those things in a 2-day period when you're running 200 miles, each person running 3 times. It is the one place that I feel all of me can be there. Sadly enough, it doesn't always happen at church. Where is the church? Guess what? We're here today. There is, what's that? It's a great day because the sun's a coming tomorrow morning, or whatever that thing is. I don't remember what the song is, but it's there. You've got discovery, you've got anger, you've got self-doubt. Then there's seclusion. Seclusion is the time when you totally shut down. This is the isolation part. Just a second, I need to double check something. Trudy, how much time do I have?
I'll let you know when there's a 5 minute.
5 minute? Okay, all right.
Are you at 5 minute now? 5 minute now.
5 minute now. All right, very good. All right, so I'm going to make it through here so Mr. Potter has his time. All right. So seclusion is when isolation sets in. And isolation is that time when you don't care, you feel lost, you're frustrated. But there's rebirth. And God's church is going to come alongside. Watch out, we might be late. Well, we're going to not only come on the scene, but we're going to make a real big difference in the Portland, Beaverton area in a way that's never been made before. Because we're in this room, we're the birthing room today about disability, all right? We are the birthing room. Number 6 is now, finally, I belong. We belong to a bigger body that our Lord Jesus Christ has made for us. I belong now because my go-to scripture is Romans 12:2. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind says, I now belong. I am a part of this, as so is other people with disabilities. And I'm so excited that developmental disabilities and autism are in the conversation now. It isn't just blind people anymore. The con artist, well, that's my pretending to be sighted when I really am blind. And we were so into that at the blind school that we wouldn't touch each other to walk with each other. We'd bump arms because, by God, we were sighted. One day I'm walking side by side on Telegraph Avenue in Berkeley, and my buddy disappeared. He had fallen into an open utility hole, but by God, he was sighted. And that was better than, so that's the con artist, right? Self-actualization has to do with, I know when I'm angry, I know when I'm mad, I know when I'm sad. In fact, it was a really funny thing happened to me 2 weeks ago. I was on a webinar, and there were 500 people on the webinar, and they wanted to take a poll of who was on the call. My voice software I could hear the person talking, but I was not hearing what the chats were about, and I thought, dang, I'm isolated. And then I started laughing. I said, oh, this is the setup. The Lord wants me to experience this so I would have something fresh to tell you about being isolated from the rest of the world. But it's a pretty lonely place. It's a pretty lonely place. So to close my time out, I have to pick on a buddy of mine in the room here, a guy named Pastor Tom Shive, right? He's here, right? He's a good friend. Thomas, you're good, right? Now, Tom has one malady I need to share with you. He is a Chicago Cubs fan. That's a terrible malady. I don't understand why he could have the audacity to root for the Cubs over the Dodgers. But nevertheless, I'm going to pay homage to him because you're going to stand up. We're going to go to a baseball park, Wrigley Field, and we're going to sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." And when if you don't know the song, I'll teach it to you. Then you'll figure it out. But see, the Cubs, we're going to root for the Cubbies. So stand up to your feet. We'll walk through the song because I know some of you aren't baseball fans, and then I'm out of here. But we're going to stand up and sing this song. It goes, and by the way, the announcer is a man by the name of Harry Carey. Harry Carey says, a 1, a 2, a 3. Now sing it with me. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I never get back, so we'll root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame, for it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Pretty good. Okay, we're going to do it one more time. You're going to sing it. After we're done, you're going to cheer like crazy for the Cubbies, and then I'll tell you why you're doing that. A 1, a 2, a 3, take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I never get back, so we'll root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame, for it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, they're out at the old ball. Let me hear it, yeah. All right, here's the reason for the story. You may be seated. The Chicago Cubs was the leader in first starting and promoting the ADA requirements that Christy and Ian talked about. But they went beyond the ADA. They are out in the public. They are out in the community, rounding up people to come to the ballpark and enjoy their product. MLB is now getting better. I had the privilege to work with the Seattle Mariners a year and a half ago. They have 30 people with disabilities on staff. They have a mom and her son handing out brochures. They have a person with a disability as an elevator operator. They have all kinds of people all over the place. What's the question and relevance for me sharing that with you? Because we're at a church-related conference. Can we become that? Can we have our students and with developmental disabilities, and some of you are already doing great work, but we need to be catching up with and maybe even surpassing what the Cubs and the Mariners are doing, because we have a greater product, and that product is in the person of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen and amen.
Thank you, Steve. Well, let's continue on with deepening this whole conversation. And we're going to go with Dr. Robert Potter, who is a retired physician who was a professor of medicine for 35 years at the University of Kansas School of Medicine. In addition to being a geriatric specialist, Dr. Potter holds a PhD from the University of Chicago Divinity School in combined areas of religion, psychology, and ethics. For the past 30 years, he has been a scholar of medical ethics both in Kansas City and here in Portland at OHSU. He has been working with Multnomah Seminary on a project to increase the teaching of science as a part of the theological curriculum. Dr. Potter will focus his time today as it relates to his practice and experiences with disabled patients and how he teaches medical professionals to care for the disabled. Let's welcome Dr. Potter.
I just want to know, are there any Jayhawks fans here? Yeah, okay, all right, yeah, we'll get that, just wanted to get that over with, that's fine. I grew up in Middle Missouri in a farm culture. In the farm culture, the elderly were special. But the elderly tend to be disabled in one way or another. A little stumbly, maybe they've had a stroke, their arthritis has got them crippled up. They don't see as well as they used to. They don't hear as well as they used to. They don't think as fast as they used to. And as a youth, I was drawn to the incredible capacity of my elders to continue to make it in the world. When I went to medical school from 60 to 64, you know, I thought it was pretty hot stuff. I still think I'm pretty hot stuff, but I may not live long enough to get over it, you know. But there was one way in which I realized that humility was the proper approach to those with disability. A patient told me once, "Potter, we disabled people know things about life you'll never figure out." That's when I realized that I saw disabled persons as spiritual giants who had lived through it, conquered through a resilience that I can't even imagine. So when I was talking to medical students, what I would tell them is, don't ever say this, "Oh, I know what you're going through," because you don't know what they are going through. Approach everyone through the lens of humility in their disability, because they are the spiritual giants. We've had a little trouble with 4 words in medicine. I think we have a little trouble with them generally. The words are empathy, sympathy, pity, and compassion. And I had to be pretty careful with medical students and with myself and with all those that I worked with in the professional world to be sure that they understood how to use those words. The word empathy was actually invented in 1906. The German aesthetic romantics in the late 1800s had invented a word in German, Einfühlung, and what it meant was that what it was trying to communicate was the capacity to feel what the other felt. And they were using the word as a little bit different from sympathy, which had been around, particularly in the philosophical world, since David Hume in the 1700s. He defined sympathy as fellow feeling. Isn't that an easy definition of sympathy, isn't it? Or even empathy, a fellow feeling. Well, this word empathy was invented in 1906 out of 2 pieces from Greek words, and it was introduced as if it's different from sympathy. But nobody could actually figure out what the difference was, except in the world of medicine, we substituted sympathy with the word pity. And we said, don't ever have pity on other people. You know, don't have pity on the patient. By the way, word studies are very important to me. The word patient itself, the word is derived from a Latin verb root, patio, which means to suffer. The patient is the person who suffers. And when we approach the person who suffers, it's not with a sense of pity. It should be with that word that we see, particularly in our translations of the work of Jesus, compassion. Compassion. And that, again, is a Latin-derived word. The prefix com means with, passion means to suffer with. So compassion is the capacity to suffer with the other. Now, we've got to be pretty careful about that. I would warn my medical students and myself as a physician that when I'm dealing with a disabled person, I don't want to imagine that I really know what they're going through, that I really can tell what to do next, that I really know what's going on here. This is where I apply the most important factor in all of medical education, and I think the most important factor for all of us, and that is listen to the voice of the patient. I ask them, what can I do for you? when somebody comes into the office, I finally gravitated to the most important question. Not, what are you complaining about today? What can I do for you? That's the primary question. What can I do for you? When I came to Portland, I was teaching up at OHSU, teaching primarily first and second year medical students in the area of ethics. We had 4 people lined up in wheelchairs, 4 young quadriplegic patients. Can you imagine the impact of 4 quadriplegic patients in front of a group of 120 medical students? What was the purpose? Pity? No. Empathy, to imagine what they're going through? Well, no, not exactly. What we did for an hour and a half was listen to the patient. Each of those persons told us, this is what I want from you when I come to see you. This is what you need to know about me when I come to see you. This is what I need for you to know so that you can figure out some way to help me in whatever I want you to help me about. That's so key. Imagine how you can translate that from the medical school setting to your own setting, wherever you're going to find yourself functioning. How do you shift that around to where you're not sitting there trying to figure out, what can I do for this person, but rather figuring out what's the next question that I can ask to get them to tell me what I can do for them? Does that fit? Does that seem to resonate with you? Does it seem so simple that you just wonder why you have to spend a whole afternoon listening to Potter talk about it? Yes, you do. It is that simple, but it's that difficult to get embedded in your mind so that you work it right, so that you're asking the questions. I've never been what you'd call disabled, although I did fall 6 weeks ago, and I'm still crippling around from that, but that's another little issue. But a year ago, I had a prostate operation. Benign reasons, should just sort of run right through this. No. Within the first week, it was 2 times in the emergency room for fresh catheters and bleeding briskly, and it was not going good. Here's an old doctor laying in his bed, imagining what? All the possible complications that I've ever seen. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course, I admit, the first year of medical school, I had 17 separate fatal illnesses. You know, I just imagined I had all that. So basically, I'm neurotic, is what I'm trying to tell you. But I fell, folks, into a pit of despair. I mean, a real pit. Into the valley. You know, I've got a doctorate in pastoral care. That was the basic core of what I did at the University of Chicago Divinity School. And I taught pastoral education in the hospitals for 35 years. I thought I knew this stuff. No, I fell into the pit of despair. I want to call that, if you will, spiritual disability. I thought it would never go away. Steve, I don't know that I worked through all 8 of these over the past year, but I recognized them. I recognized every one of them. I recognized that I discovered that I was, if you will, a failure. As a spiritual person, I was a failure. And I was angry and doubting myself. Went into seclusion. I got a little rebirth. Called my pastor over. He had written a book, pretty good book about spiritual growth and spiritual movements through the valley. And we talked a while. And I began looking again at the ancient ways of recovering, finding resilience. And gradually I pulled out, with the help of my sense of the Spirit rebirthing me and guiding me to a new sense of self. I finally realized that I could step beyond this spiritual disability. I don't know that I would want to call myself now a spiritual giant, but I'm in better shape than I was a year ago. And you know, I think I got just a glimpse of what the people with disabilities that I've been taking care of all my life, just a glimpse of what they went through. They are not whole as I am now. They still have their disability, yet they walk as spiritual giants. We need to give them honor. We need to learn from them. We need to be ready always to listen to the voice of the disabled person that can tell us how to live our life. Steve, let's talk to one another.
Yes, sir. You asked me to ask you a question?
Well, I thought it would just sort of develop naturally.
Okay. All right. What do you want to ask me? Ask me a question.
So you're asking me what I want to ask you.
That's
huh?
right.
Well, I was asking you what you wanted to ask me.
Okay.
Now, I won't say that our dialogue is at an impasse, necessarily. What I will ask you is this. Do you think that I was pretty much on the right path in teaching medical students to start with the sense of humility?
Absolutely. In fact, what's really interesting about your question, if nothing else, in all the moments of the different stages of disability that we've talked about, humility is the number one learning that goes way beyond whatever malady we might be experiencing.
Well, where would you put humility in your developmental stages of diversity?
I would put it under number 8, self-actualization.
Oh, okay. You don't become humble till you get way down there?
Oh yeah, no, you gotta go through the path. Well, here's the good part and the bad part. That I'm gonna be at self-actualization on some things, but I'm at discovery on learning about some of these new developmental disabilities. I don't know what I don't know about that, but what I know is that humility can be the ultimate gain if we understand the spiritual part of this. The problem with it is, for a long time, I was fighting God's purpose. I mean, I set out, I went to the blind school in Berkeley. I joined a Bible study because God was going to heal my blindness, and that was my mission until the age of 40, and it never happened. So what I've learned is God's answers to prayer are sometimes yes, no, or not yet, because there's humility and some other things that I need from you, child, that will help do my job, meaning his job.
I think your point about that once you get down to 8, that 1, 2, 3, and 4 never happen again.
That's right.
I think all kinds of stages of development have to recognize that same sort of recurrence of elements of the process. They keep recurring. You keep going back. You keep feeling like you've fallen back. You go back and rehearse it again, and maybe do a little better job of it the next time through. All developmental stages, whether it's the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's sense of the stages of grief. There's not just 1 through 6 and you're done, or 1 through 8 and you're done. You just keep doing it over and over and over again. You keep falling back and doing it again.
Well, and our family members and our colleagues are going to be in different places on that scale too.
Yes.
And there was a situation that occurred this week that I was with Paul and Trudy about, and the individual was clearly at stages 2 and 3, and what I didn't want to have happen was you want to hear it, but you can't cave into it just because the other person is there. And so that means, what do I do? How do I be ministerial in that situation to that person?
I guess there's one thing I learned from that too, that if you catch somebody, catch, I did bad, that's not good language there. If you recognize that somebody's at stage 3, what do you want to do? Well, you won't want to jump them down to 8, but you probably want to maybe nudge them over to 4.
That's right.
Move along slowly, gradually, a bit at a time, not jump from here to there. No. Don't you think?
That's right. Yeah. Hey, I wanted to ask you something. Have you ever had to deal, because trauma came up this morning, and I've dealt with trauma situations, redirecting someone with mental illness. Those are tough. I've done some suicide prevention, And you got to be real clear when someone has a weapon, and you got to make sure you can talk to them and not agitate them so that they won't shoot you. I've been in that kind of situation. Do you have any experience of people who have experienced trauma as part of their disability journey? Have you ever had any things to deal with that?
Oh, I've dealt with a great number of those people. Nothing comes to mind that is all that helpful right just at this moment. I think people who are disabled in their approach to life because of the harm of trauma have a particularly difficult time working through the stages that you're talking about.
Yes.
I think it's particularly difficult. I come from the Vietnam era. I did not make it to Vietnam, but in 1968, right as I was finishing my 3 years of internal medicine residency, the Kansas National Guard was called up for Vietnam. And we ended up in Colorado Springs with the 5th Mechanized Infantry Division. And, you know, every Friday I lined my company of 200 men up and read the names of the guys who were going to Vietnam in 2 weeks. 98% of our 2,000 men from Kansas went to Vietnam, and I did not. I do not understand why. But, so, you know, there's a feeling there to me that I don't want to be in a position of trying to deal, particularly with the war trauma, because I did not experience it. And that's where I feel the humility really bars me, Steve, from being somebody who can honestly work with somebody in their distress when I have not been in combat.
Although you still could be useful, but you're saying you don't want to say, I know exactly how you feel. That'll never happen. Right?
Well, it won't work to begin with.
Now, as a side, I need to tell you, my number was up, and that's one time the perks of blindness kicked in, okay? Because I was destined to go to Vietnam, and instead I'm blind and I can't go.
Okay, well, Trudy has just touched me gently on the shoulder, and she'd like to pause here for questions.
Okay, I'm going to actually take your mic so I can give it to Paul. Sorry.
You want mine instead?
You hold on to yours. You get to share.
You can have this.
You get to share a mic so that so that Paul can go around. So if you have questions for Steve or Dr. Potter, could you please raise your hand? Right up here.
Dr. Potter, my question is, as you talked about training for young medical doctors, is there currently training for dealing with cognitive disabilities and how to speak, how to engage people? I say that because my daughter is an adult now, and all of her growing up years, if we saw a professional, the person would look at me, direct questions to me rather than her. And so I'm just wondering what it's like now.
If you didn't hear it well, the question was, is there better education for medical students in regard to communication skills? I want you to know that we never were very good at that, you know, and we're still not, except I want to give credit to folks up at OHSU. The Center for Ethics has, for the last 2 years, been producing a now nationally known program to improve communication skills. And they're doing it as really an act out of the Ethics Center, that it's more ethical to have real skills at communication. And I can't give you all the details of that, but there is I think, an increasing recognition that our communication skills in medicine are not as good as we thought they were. We thought if we knew exactly where the liver was, that was about all you really needed to know. But I think we've shifted that around a little bit now. Yeah.
Barbara, actually, there are some psychologists who have the capacity to do cognitive training. The problem is, I don't know which psychologists do and which of them don't. I used to know when I was more tightly in the mix, 10 or 15 years ago, but there are some psychologists who can do that cognitive training.
Thank you, brothers, for sharing parts of your stories and God's faithfulness in your lives. Steve, my question is for you. You said you weren't blind until you were 40. in counseling people who believe that God can heal them, how do you encourage their faith, but also recognize the possibility that God may not heal them? And just this seems like a difficult. Historically, the church obviously has believed in healing, but obviously God doesn't heal everyone. So how did you personally come to peace with that? And then maybe how would you counsel someone who is really wrestling with, why won't God just heal me?
This is a long-term journey. First, it's a relational conversation, but the person has to be willing to do their own study and their own work if they can get through enough anger. Like, I had a lot of significant people, like that pastor for whom I threw the box of Kleenex. He, at the end, taught me how to slalom ski, took me tandem bike riding. He came to my world, and he's 91 years old. So a long-term relationship, but he gave me something more important than that, and that was guiding me toward the scriptures that I might ponder to study that, because it does come to me on my own, in my own prayer time, but it's a very long-term, it's not going to happen tomorrow kind of thing.
Though this is perhaps an unusual use of the words, but I want to make a distinction between the word healing and curing. Occasionally in medicine, doing internal medicine, the medicine of the adult, I didn't cure a lot of people. I might get their blood pressure down a little bit, or I might get their blood sugar a little more regulated, but I didn't really cure them. But what I was searching for was healing. And the distinction is, it isn't fixed, but you are now able to live with it, live through it, live beyond it. And I think there's a worthwhile distinction, if you can put that in your head, between curing and healing.
Thank you, Dr. Potter. It's funny because my question was somewhat related to what you just said, and this is for both of you, Steve, and whether you would personally prefer, like, which of the two concepts do you personally prefer, or seem to ascribe to more, prevention versus cure, as concepts, whether you prefer one or the other? And I guess the other component of that, related to healing, was a teaching or concepts around the fulfillment of time or the fullness of time. For example, there may be 4 or 5 different diseases or conditions, medical conditions, which are gone today. Some say it's as a result of prayers and the continual belief of individuals from previous generations before, who at least believed until the fulfillment of that knowledge or technology was brought forth today. And I think that's something that I'm having trouble with being able to relate to peers, like what the gentleman just said. How do I encourage them in their faith to believe that they can be healed, while also balancing that or sobering that with the potential that it may not be, at least within their lifetime. Maybe in the future, but not in their lifetime.
I think prevention versus healing, the key is, because now I can ask the question, God, what are you trying to teach me through not answering my prayer for sight, but the hands and feet of Jesus are even closer to me now than they would have been had sight come to me. So that's, I don't know if that's answering your prevention thing, but it is a way of holding oneself. So the reason that happened for me is because there were key people from the church who were always near me when I needed them to ask those kinds of questions.
Clearly prevention is better than having a problem occur. But that's not where I'd like to put my answer. My answer, it sounds simplistic, but I think there is a critical dimension to this. When I read the New Testament and the life and ministry of our Lord Jesus, Jesus did not cure everybody. Not everybody is going to be cured. I'm not even sure that we are required to even ask to be cured. It seems like that is our prayer, our heart's sincere desire. But I am, as a preventative, I am more interested in people learning to live with their illness and be healed and move beyond it than I am for them to go to the next charlatan to look for a curing.
I think we have time for one last question.
Hi. I'm in healthcare and I work with folks with degenerative conditions, and I work with people who demonstrate incredible resiliency in the face of disability, and people who struggle and who aren't able to sort of muster that same resiliency. As a healthcare provider, it is often challenging to work with those who maybe aren't able to adapt as those who are more resilient may. And I'm wondering if you can speak to how we honor those who don't have that sort of virtue of resiliency, but still require our consideration and our valuing.
I can answer that question in two contexts. One is, as a 6-year-old boy, when my mom was putting me on a train to send me away from home to go to school, I'm tears. Why do I have to go? And she said, because we love you. Now, that was a poor answer for a 6-year-old to hear, because we love you, because I wanted to be home. But so depending on when you're at an infant stage of development, that's how you're going to hear it. When you're at a larger stage, I can now say, well, God also, there was some guy hanging on a cross. I think he was in the middle, and Jesus was the guy in the middle on that cross. It's because he loved us. So back to your question, the best thing you can do is be there as a listener wherever that person is, and let them know that you hear their feeling. You're not going to fix that question, but what you can do is let me know that you care and that you're with me.
Okay, I'm sorry, we're out of time. I know there's
You
more.
started 2 minutes late, Drew.
Oh dear. I do need to move us forward, and I know it's getting into the afternoon, and I am so excited for the last two building blocks that we have coming in just a few minutes. So do not delay to come back in 10 minutes from our quick break, and we will come back and finish out some exciting options for our futures. Be back in 10.